Hello, Happiness Abounder, and welcome back. So, question for you. We're going to dive right on in today. Do you have a hard time saying no? Do you say yes to other people and then feel overwhelmed later and then tend to let those other people down? Or do you tend to let yourself down because you've said yes to so many other people? Do you have a hard time with what in the self-help world we call boundaries? It's hard to set boundaries, it's hard to define boundaries, and you'll respect other people's boundaries, but they may not respect yours. Do you struggle with feeling confident and secure in yourself if you are not getting validation from other people? I ask all of this because if you haven't guessed it yet, this week's theme week is all about people pleasing. And people pleasing is a pretty big issue when it comes to our happiness. When we're saying yes to everyone else, it's really hard to have space in our lives to say yes to ourselves. And in fact, saying yes to everyone else often leads to saying no to ourselves. When we continue to say no to ourselves, we start to lose who we are. And when we lose who we are, we're not living by our values. We don't know what we stand for. And when we don't have those foundational elements, and we're telling ourselves no, we start to create a distance from who we actually are to who other people think we are. And we work so hard to please those other people, we lose all sense of ourselves. When you lose all sense of yourself, you are constantly seeking validation from other people. And when that validation doesn't come, those are the days where you spiral down. You do nothing but binge watch Netflix all day because you feel like you're a worthless piece of crap because someone didn't tell you otherwise today. Now, that may seem pretty extreme, but the thing is, it actually happens. People pleasing has a range of how we please people, but the effects on us also are within that range. Yes, we want to help the people around us be happier, and we think that by people pleasing with them and by saying yes, that we can do that. And at the beginning, the very start of this spectrum, there's nothing wrong with that. But as we start to go further down the spectrum where we're saying yes to everything, we feel like we can't say no, we struggle with boundaries, we feel like we're letting people down constantly, we're starting to say no to ourselves, we're starting to lose who we are, then we're binge watching TV because we didn't get validated by someone today. Like, that continues on down the scale, and that's when people pleasing deeply impacts our happiness. So, if that sounds like you, in any of that scope, I hope that you'll enjoy this week and that it will resonate with you, because people pleasing is such a big issue in our lives today. So that said, why do we people please? What's the point of it? First and foremost, our brain is hardwired to want to be a part of society. So for many of us, it feels like we are afraid that if we say no, we will be shunned and outcast from society, which to our brain is one of our biggest fears. If we go back to very primal brain, very caveman-esque days, we lived in tribes. And to survive, each member of the tribe had a role, or sets of members of the tribe had roles: hunters, gatherers, nurturers, etc. So you had to have your community to survive. Being shunned, being cut off from the tribe, meant death. So that fear, that primal fear, still lives in our brain. So the start of people pleasing usually is based on fear that if I tell this person no, or if I then set a boundary, I will be cast out. And then our brain goes, no, we can't survive if we're cast out. You need to say yes to that. And that's when we start having trouble saying no and really being able to set expectations for a yes down the line, or even just boundaries of what they could expect from us in the future. But the root cause of it all is that fear. That fear that we will be cast out. But I also want to focus on a secondary fear that I think when most people talk about people pleasing, they don't really address. So here it is. Do you know anyone, or are you the type of person who it's not so much a fear of being cast out because you have a pretty strong group of friends, but when you are not pleasing other people, you're left with yourself. And when you need to focus on your own life, that means taking accountability and responsibility. And that can be incredibly scary. So sometimes we move into people pleasing because we have a fear of ourselves. We have a fear of uncovering and being responsible for our actions. It's easier to say, I did this because so-and-so asked me to, versus I did this because I wanted to. I did this because I made the choice. Now, I know that's hitting home for a few of you. That's the same fear that is when you are home alone and there's nothing to distract you, there's no one to be having conversations with, you're immediately on social media, or you immediately go to TV. You have to have noise constantly running in the background because you don't necessarily like being alone with yourself. And it's the combo of that combo of the fear of being alone with yourself and taking that responsibility for your life, plus the fear of feeling like you will be cast out if you don't say yes, that really leads to this negative path of people pleasing. So that's what this week is all about. We're going to dive into living by someone else's checklist. I think we've all been there before, right? Asking why we take action on things and not on others. We'll talk about how people pleasing can help you or hinder you. And then we'll also talk about the 5 ways to beat people pleasing. But this episode, I want to just dive into those fears, because I think it's a core understanding of, if you struggle saying no, what are those deep, deep, deep fears? And it can also vary depending on the person. Sometimes it depends on who asks you that you feel like you can't say no because you'll be cast out. So I want you to explore these situations in your life. Look at where you may be people pleasing and look at where it's at on the scale. Is it healthy? Is it positive relationships and not necessarily people pleasing? Or is it in the middle? Or is it on the far end of the spectrum where you can't say no, you're constantly saying yes, you feel like you don't have boundaries, and even though you want boundaries, that would mean saying yes to yourself, which is scary because that means accepting responsibility and accountability. So you keep on saying yes, and you keep on getting run around in a tizzy because there's so much to do that it's overwhelming. And then in some cases, then you don't do anything and you let a lot of people down and they think you're a flake, and then that's scary because you could be cast out, and so you try to people please more, and the vicious cycle continues. If any of that sounds familiar, be sure to tune in for the rest of the episodes this week. But even if you don't catch the rest of the episodes, I want you to be thinking where you fit on that scale, and if you really are a people pleaser, if you're afraid of being a social outcast, and maybe if you're afraid of being alone and accepting responsibility in your life. It's going to be a hard subject for you if it is, but absolutely transformational. So stay tuned. And if you know a people pleaser and they're always saying how they need to say no, but they just can't, make sure to share this episode as well as the rest of the episodes this week with that special individual. So that said, have a wonderful day. Check your fears at the door for people pleasing, and above everything else, remember, you are capable of happiness abound.